So revolves around the evolving meta gearing up for the North American International Championships. I'm Jake, that's Sean. Sean, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm a little sleepy right now. It's an early.
Yeah,
You have an early recording every time now, and this time because you are also on a more Eastern Coast time, I also have an early recording. So we're both
nothing changes
sleepy.
for me. Yeah, nothing changes for me. Got the coffee, ready to go at this point. Do you drink matcha in the morning?
I'll
Because I
either
know
drink matcha.
usually.
Yeah, usually I drink matcha. Yeah, sometimes coffee, but usually matcha.
Okay, I was gonna say I don't know if I've ever have. I don't know if we've ever seen you drink coffee on the podcast, but we've definitely seen matcha. I
Yeah,
remember
we've
that.
definitely seen matcha. That's my typical go-to morning drink. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, but the Mavs are going to the finals,
Oh yeah,
Jake.
they won. Was it 4-1 was the score?
Yeah, that was the final like series thing. So,
Yeah, yeah.
apologies to all of our Timberwolves viewers out there. I'm sure that you don't want to hear this several days after the fact. This just happened last night as the time of our recording. So, getting an
Sean
early one
dating
in.
our recording immediately. We've
Yeah,
got some travel going on. I'm
we
going to
do.
another state and Sean is
Also
traveling out
traveling.
to, yeah, so we're getting in some good work now, but there's plenty to talk about in this upcoming week because NAIC is right around the corner. It's a brand new format. Twilight Masquerade is legal, a bunch of new decks that we'll probably see on screen, and a bunch of old decks rehashed into new lights as well. We're going to put them in a tier list today. You
Yeah.
guys enjoyed our tier list video the other day, kind of talking about some different cards and such. So we're gonna kind of do it again. Oh, we talked about the Pokemon Full Arts in like an extra episode. That's right. That's what it was.
Yeah, yeah. So I know that that episode there was a couple of strong opinions. Hey, we know there was going to be strong opinions about that art. So such
Trust me,
as
there's strong opinions when you do tier lists in general.
right,
It's fine.
right. But yeah, like we're doing a tier list now, just because it's a. I think for me, it was also an easier way to think about how do we do predictions for this one because we can
It's
kind
all.
of
It's
talk
just
about it.
it. It's a really easy way to like conceptualize and like visualize like what we're talking about in the meta because we could just go through each deck one by one and be like, oh yeah, and spend 5 minutes talking about the deck and what it does and how strong it is. But it's easier when we categorize them for from a viewer perspective to know like how actually strong we think it is or much of a trap it is, if that makes sense. So
Yes, indeed. But yeah, we got a long one.
mhm.
So let us know, sound off in the comments in the Discord, whatever, how you think our tier list will stack up, and then after NAIC, reference this video again and roast us on how right or wrong we might have been. So
We're actually gonna roast our, as usual, we're gonna
roast
roast
ourselves.
ourselves
Yeah.
in the future podcasts. Like when I thought Lugia was gonna be the best deck in format last format, and then it didn't really appear once.
But Jake, there's always a chance for Lugia to be top tier again. So I'm hopping over to the browser now so we can see the tier list.
Hmm.
We got it pulled up here. Just a quick note on the tier list. We only have four, rankings just because, at a certain point it's like we don't need to go 1.5, 2.5, like 4 or 5. We have
Hmm.
like S tier, which relatively speaking, there should only be one deck, maybe two max, that ever sit in that S tier for
It's
everybody's
really
reference.
just decks that like influence the meta. Like the
Yeah,
meta really revolves around it. Like decks are built based off of these decks, whatever. It's like when ADP was running rampant almost, except it doesn't have to be to that extreme.
exactly. So yeah, like we have S tier, and then below that we just have tier one, which I just say like they're good decks. They definitely
Hmm.
could win this tournament. Yeah, that nothing more to say. They're just really good decks. Tier two, I'm calling sort of mid tier decks. That doesn't mean the decks are bad. It just means maybe they have a series of bad matchups, some glaring weaknesses. They might win the tournament, but it would probably be a surprise to most people. And then tier three, I'm just calling meme decks. That doesn't again mean that they're bad. You might really enjoy them on ladder on PTCG Live. But most likely they will not make much of an impact at a large event, despite how fun they might be to play.
Hmm.
So that's sort of our thought process there on like how you can think about what we mean when we say these are the 4 tiers. We're not going to be showing you any decks that are actually unplayable. That's not what we're implying by any of this either.
Every deck is playable if you believe, and it has at least one basic Pokemon in it.
Right, exactly. Every deck is legal if you have one basic Pokemon. So there we
Yeah.
go. Um, but yeah, I mean, this all the different Pokemon here too. This tier list is something I just yoinked from Tier List Maker. Thank you to I think it was Liam who put this one originally together. So
Mhm.
there are some that we're more familiar with as decks, and some that we're less. But jumping into it in no particular order, Jake, we have Ancient Box.
Ancient Box. So I think Ancient Box stays around. I think it's still part of the meta simply because you bring in the introduction of these other Pokemon, right? You have new bench sitters in Ogremont or Ogerpon in the Teal Mass Ogerpon, or really any of the Ogerpons, right? In general, you bring the introduction of Raging Bolt, which is 240 HP, and with a Bravery Charm, 290 or so on its still hittable numbers for the Koraidon, even though Ancient Box may not necessarily get a ton of new cards overall. I think because of those introductions inside, it still is a breathable format for the deck and is still something that you're going to see, especially because it's so cheap to build, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say
You
like,
really only have a couple cards.
do you think people are gonna change up the Ancient Box to basically become Raging Bolt? Because I'm like, that's my question. Because like before, it was all single prizer, right? The whole
I
plan
think.
was Roaring Moon, Koraidon. It's represented by Koraidon in this image, but for the most part, it's a
Mhm.
Roaring Moon, baby Roaring Moon deck. So as a
I
single
don't.
prize deck, though,
Mhm. I don't know if you really play. I don't think you play Raging Bolt mainly because of the idea. Like you would have to run a third type of energy, right? Because
yeah,
like Raging Bolt doesn't have an ability like the Ogre Pawn, like that they do in those decks. Um, it's not necessarily a support Pokemon. It's like a finishing blow big guy Pokemon, and so if you want to attack with it, you have to have dark energies, fighting energies, and lightning energies in your deck. And I don't
yeah.
know if the space is enough to be able to fit that Pokemon in there. I think you would rather just, if you did have this Pokemon in there, it would literally just be for the purpose, in my opinion, of getting more damage out, right?
Well,
In like it would always be in the discard pile. It would never be in
yeah.
play.
Well, so I guess the question then is, Jake, does this deck doesn't really get anything new then from the new set?
No, no, I don't think so. I think it just becomes more likely to be able to one-shot things and keep up with some pacing in certain matchups of the meta, like a larger percent of the meta because there's these smaller bodies coming in.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. The introduction. So when you said earlier the introduction of these other Pokemon, you meant like for your opponents playing.
Oh yeah, 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 like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
200 to
Got it.
260 HP Pokemon.
Rather than having to always power through a Charizard, let's say
Yeah,
330 is
like
just
two shots
so
something.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, I mean, my gut says that this deck, like we were talking about, it didn't. Maybe it got some card that we're not aware of or we're not thinking of, but didn't really get much in the way of support.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it was a great deck in the last format. Maybe it's a sleeper pick. You could very well see it, but the 200 damage, the problem with, in my opinion, the Roaring Moon deck is in previous formats, throwing the Ancient Booster Capsule on it presented decks, especially Charizard, with a kind of awkward situation early game where they
Hmm.
couldn't actually knock it out because 200 HP was like, that's just outside my range, right?
Hmm.
But now, with a very popular deck being Dragapult, most likely, 200 damage is exactly what Dragapult does with its attack.
Hmm.
So now the Ancient Booster Capsule strategy sort of, in my mind, fades away a little bit. And I think that puts it in a more mid-tier discussion for right now.
I think I could also put it in a mid-tier discussion because spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about Lugia later with some of the pieces it gets. And Lugia being able to respond and answer with like Chinchinos and kind of pace you in the one prize matchup,
Mhm.
especially, and they can do the output of damage whether you have the capsule or not, is kind of the forwards and backwards notion, the backwards portion of like uh of that deck as a whole.
So the next deck on our list, Jake, is it
Mhm.
just is an Arceus V-Star card, but we've decided that this represents a pretty recent deck, Arceus V-Star Control, where you
Mhm.
play like a 3/3 line of Arceus V-Star, and then primarily your goal is just to use a bunch of the new controlling cards out there to put your opponent into really awkward situations. You
Mhm.
still, I think the deck still aims to take 6 prizes. So it's not like you're trying to mill your opponent out in that way,
Yeah.
or get them
It's
to
more
like
like a Zoro
trapped.
control kind of style.
Exactly. It's just a very annoying deck to play against. Um, yeah, but it's still going to take prizes. So
Mhm.
I'm not really that familiar with this deck. Jake, did you watch any of the stream matches where it
I
played?
did I did watch Olive's stream match that they had on the channel. It was a cool deck overall, but I don't think it's any more than mid overall. I think it's one of those decks that like you have to know inside and out, right? It's like what I was saying about Gardevoir at the beginning
Hmm.
of last format, where I was like, I don't think the deck is like super viable overall. Like I don't think you can just like pick it up and be able to excel extremely with it. I think it's something that you need to know the matchups in and out. You need to know exactly your game plan all the time, what you're going to be doing a couple turns ahead. Like it's much more skill intensive of trying to get your, and it sounds kind of weird because you're playing Arceus, right? Like attach first turn and then
Yeah.
attach second turn, play the V-Star power. But I think overall it's just a trickier deck that you need to be fully aware of. So I would consider it more in the mid tier.
I would agree also because it's a control deck, but it's a control deck light.
Hmm.
And I think that control as a strategy, whatever form you're playing it in, benefits from a format being better defined. And we'll get to that later when we talk about the more popular control decks, maybe. But I
Hmm.
think that this deck being like control light, I worry that like it's not nobody's going to necessarily have all the right pieces in place for this format
Hmm.
yet. Like it might get better over time, but currently I think that it would be not the I don't think it would be an ideal pick for NAIC if you want to play any form of control.
Yeah.
So, next deck on the list is also technically an Arceus V-Star deck, but it's represented by Armor Rouge. It is the like Arceus V-Star Firebox combination deck, with Armor Rouge's ability allowing you to. I think does it allow you to move fire energy around Armor Rouge's ability?
Yes, it allows
Yeah.
you to move fire energy.
So this deck is interesting. You know, there's not really much support right now for fire in a proper fire in a proper like fire Pokemon deck. You have fire represented in Charizard, fire represented in Dragapult, but it's a weird time for actual fire Pokemon. So I don't know. In my mind, Jake, I'll just say this sits probably in a meme tier for me.
Yeah, this is a funny meme tier deck.
Like one person might do really well with it and end up on stream, and like that's cool. But people should watch that stuff. It's always fun to see something different. But I can't imagine that it has the answers it needs for any aspect of like where the format is at. It might be consistent in its own right, but I didn't really get much in the way of new cards either. So
Hmm.
I'm sticking it in meme tier, and then we can
That's fine. I'll
mosey
put it there
on.
too.
We can mosey on to a deck that I think people are like tentatively hyped about, Jake, which is
Hmm.
Blissey. Blissey
Okay.
EX. So, Jake, can you explain this Blissey deck for people who maybe haven't played it on PTCG Live? It's never really been on a stream.
Blissey is more of a stall-ish kind of deck. Running it with the monkey dories, you are constantly moving energies off of
Damage
your
counters.
there well you move
Oh,
energies
you do
right
move
through
energy, yeah.
Blissey's ability to each of the monkey dories, and then with the monkey dories you take damage counters off of your Blissey and move them. So that's kind of what this style of deck is. It is really cool when it does get to pop off. I've watched a couple people like Azul, I think, played it on the release day of Twilight Masquerade, and it was a really, really cool deck. I don't think it was that good, but I think it was really, really cool. And especially in a game plan where maybe somebody doesn't know exactly how to play against it, which is probably relatively likely heading into this tournament. It can, like you said, if somebody's making a deep run, that's something that can certainly be viable. But I don't expect this deck to even really be like, this is more like gimmick as of right now, because I mean it needs a lot of workshop.
Well, my question for you then, because this is interesting, right?
Hmm.
My thought is that Blissey is much better than people give it credit for. I don't know how much people are really giving it credit for, but like I'm thinking about that. It's 300 HP. The weakness is fighting, right? And I'm like,
Hmm.
I'm looking around and I'm like, I don't see a lot of fighting decks. You have the Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon, but that's really there to just block to wall people out. The only other fighting Pokemon I see around is maybe Greninja EX. So in terms of one-shotting this Blissey, it's you're really limited to Raging Bolt and Chien-Pao and
Hmm.
a late game Charizard if you make it there. But like, and I guess Lugia does have the potential to one hit KO, but it does cost a lot of resources. But really,
Yeah.
there's only a couple of decks, maybe Roaring Moon. There's only a few decks here that depending on their popularity can really one shot it. And if you're playing a deck that can't one shot this Blissey between Monkey Dory and Sharon's Care, which I think it's important to mention, which Sharon's Care just allows you to pick the Blissey up. It's only a stage 1, so you can pick it
Like
up.
you have Sharon's Care and potentially something like a, or no, you don't have Penny. Never mind. Keep
But you
going.
could have like Scoop Up Cyclone if that's this deck
Hmm.
usually I think runs the Hero's Cape,
Hmm.
but you could run Scoop Up Cyclone too. And because the thing it evolves from is just a basic, it's much easier to loop that every game, every
Hmm.
turn, like Wigglytuff wanted to do back in the last couple formats. And the Chanseys, if you play one of the Chanseys that's like 120 HP, those Chanseys themselves are pretty safe from a Dragapult snipe, because Dragapult has to snipe twice in order to effectively knock them out. So
Hmm.
I don't know. Like I think I haven't watched a lot of gameplay, Jake. Maybe you've watched more than I have, but on paper, it seems like it could be really good. I don't know.
I just think it's one of those things that, like, you're always sticking your Blissey EX in active, right? You're always doing 180, could be less, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of something like double turbo energies. Um,
Yep.
and so at that point, you're doing 160, right? So you get any sort of deck that also does like some healing, and you're kind of in trouble in a sense. There is some flexibility in the deck and some other pieces that you can manipulate around, right? Like Frostlass comes to mind. You could potentially put like Frostlass in this deck if you're trying to just move these damage counters from your Pokemon to an opponent's Pokemon. You can really overwhelm them with something like a Snow Frostlass line in the deck as well. But I think your main strategy revolves around Monkey Dory for sure. Um, and I don't
Interesting.
I, like. I'm just not sold. It's one of those decks that I like. I see the potential and I see the vision, but I'm not sold on it yet. And maybe it's just because it doesn't have results and it's not like the forefront of everyone's YouTube thumbnails, right?
That's
Like
true.
showing off the decks. But
So,
um,
would you put this in mid tier then for you?
I mean, I would put it lower than that, but you're pretty high on it, so I'm okay with mid tier.
I mean, I don't know how it's gonna do.
Hmm.
At NAIC, like I haven't tested the deck, so I can't really say too much. But on paper, I don't
Hmm.
think it's a meme. Let's just say that. I think if somebody finds the right deck, the right 60 cards, and if somebody better understands what the meta they're likely to face is and makes the right choices, I think being able to play Blissey, being able to play, a Barrel line as your draw engine and Sharon's Care to heal.
No, I don't think
It's
you play.
You
I
don't
don't
play
know if you
Barrel?
can.
Because if you
No,
don't play
because I
Barrel,
don't
you don't
think
have a
you
draw
can.
engine.
Well, I don't think you can fit it, truthfully. Just based on the different things that you have in there, I think you'd rather
Maybe.
just run Pokegears
No, that's true. That's true. That's fair.
to find your stuff. Because Pokegear can get you like Arvins and Earth Vessels, right?
Yeah.
It can also find like Turbo Energizes, right? I know at least some of the earlier decks that I saw, Turbo Energize was run in the deck to be able to accelerate energies on these Blissies, and these Monkey Dories and stuff to be able to do your
Yeah.
sort of effect loops. So yeah, I think
Okay.
the deck definitely falls apart though when you run into like a one-shot matchup.
Yeah, I would
But
agree
again,
with
it's
that.
a lot of resources to be able to do that one shot.
Speaking of one shot potential, at least in the late game, we have Charizard EX, the former, I'm going to say former king of the
Hmm.
format in terms of number of people who played it. It was a very
Yes,
successful deck too at some points, but now I think the king has fallen, Jake. How far did it fall is the question, really.
I don't necessarily say that it's fallen. Truthfully, I still would consider it a top tier deck just because of the evolution that we saw. Like, yeah, I would agree. Los Angeles, it really didn't look like there was a lot of Charizards. But if you remember Lucas's deck, it still ran a 1-1 Charizard line in the deck alongside the Pidgeot, and you look at some of the other, top decks as well. I still think Charizard is prevalent overall. Maybe it's not a top tier, but I still think it's much better because of the ability to morph that it's seen over time, right? Its ability to be flexible and evolve, into this control style type of deck and still be present in a lot of different situations.
So, as like a deck itself, because like let's be truthful, like Charizard may show up as a part of Dragapult. So, but I would consider
Hmm.
that at this point more of a Dragapult deck with a Charizard energy accelerator engine.
I would say if you're gonna look at this deck and this like what we've got on it, I think
Yeah.
you'd consider it more either like a Charizard Pidgeot
Yeah,
type
yeah,
deal, and
just
it could be Pidgeot Charizard as well,
yeah,
like
yeah.
Lucas's
Charizard
deck.
is your main attacker in the deck for
Yeah.
the most part. I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't think it's a tough one. Like part of me wants to say mid tier because of Teal Mask Ogerpon. If that deck
Hmm.
is as played as it is hyped, I think Charizard falls off a cliff, to be frank, because Charizard's output doesn't keep pace with Raging Bolt and Teal Mask.
Does it
Like,
though?
no. Because think about it like this: the Teal Mask Ogerpon comes in and one shots you, easy, no issues, right? Early game.
And it only has 210 HP, so you immediately one-shot it.
Yep. And then you come in there with a Raging Bolt and you throw a Hero's Cape or a Bravery Charm on one of those guys, right? And
Hmm.
you take out another Pokemon. I suppose it could then hit 300 damage, but I just think the problem is like depending on the matchup, depending on the way that the game plays out, you could also go Raging Bolt early and put the Teal Mask Ogrepons in the back. Then so you knock it out with a Raging Bolt, it can do now 240, but unless they go grab a Lost Vacuum with their Pidgeot, you can't knock out the Raging Bolt because the Raging Bolt most likely has a Bravery Charm on it. So
Hmm.
then, if you don't get that little combination, Raging Bolt comes in and says, "Okay, I'm going to take another two prizes, and now you can one shot me with anything, but I can one shot you with Teal Mask."
Hmm.
I don't know. That's in my mind. That's one where I'm like, if that deck sees a lot of play, I think it is an existential threat to Charizard. That's how bad I think the matchup probably is if it's played
Interesting.
correctly.
I don't. I can see where you're coming from, and like I haven't done the testing. Obviously, I've been traveling. I don't have all my Pokemon cards, but I still think Charizard, like overall, does have some viability. It might not be a top tier, but it's definitely like a meta threat. Like we've seen Charizard take up a bulk of this meta share, and we've still seen it even in its disappearance in Los Angeles. Right? We've still seen several appearances in like the top 30 decks. Um, overall in a lot of these pieces. So, but I do see and kind of agree that Teal Mask Ogerpon overall provides a problem for the deck.
Yeah. I also think Dragapult is a real problem for the deck because Dragapult plays Devolution TM. And so they place damage counters. They devolve your Pidgeot and your
Mhm.
Charizards and your Charmeleons, and then everything dies and you lose.
Then I just like, I don't know, because then I'm like, oh yeah, Devolution TM as well. And yes, you evolve into a stage one Drakloak, but like you're still evolving into a stage one Drakloak, which is almost as detrimental. Not necessarily as much, but still like much of a problem. I don't know if Devolution. I feel like Devolution TM is too slow in this format.
Not if you're playing Dragapult. Because
I don't know.
if you're playing Dragapult, you don't mind playing slow. Your whole game is damage counter placement,
I
right?
would I would rather as Dragapult play TM Evolution rather than TM Devolution.
I mean, you might play both.
I mean, you
But
could play both.
I don't know. I know that a lot of the Japanese lists, at least,
Hmm.
won tournaments based or like got really high results in tournaments based off of Devo TM. Like top
Hmm.
tables in Japan at like day 2 or whatever, the Dragapult that got the Devo TM on the right turn was the Dragapult that won. So it could be devastating in a deck that relies heavily on rare candy. So that's also, I think that I'm probably underplaying the Charizard deck a little too much because it is. I will grant it that it is a deck that has been thought through carefully, and there's always value in bringing a deck like that to a big tournament because people are going to bring decks that like maybe they're not really quite right yet. And
Hmm.
so like if your list is just more consistent than your opponent's, even if the matchup is not always the best, you will likely have a better overall record than your opponent then.
Hmm.
So I do think that there is that value. So like I don't know, net I put Charizard in good, like in tier 1 for now because it's a very good deck. It's not like it gets worse, by itself, but I think it is definitely a tier 1 deck that is threatened to become a tier 2 deck depending on the results of the weekend.
Okay.
That's my gut.
Hmm.
But another deck that was top tables for a while, and I don't really know where this one sits actually, Chien-Pao. Jake, where does Chien-Pao even live in this new world?
I think Chien-Pao. I mean, Chien-Pao overall has fallen off, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
it continues to stay in that kind of almost irrelevancy, right? We see so many more decks, right? And we see this deck Chien-Pao as like a glass cannon type deck and truly a glass cannon. And I think that puts a lot of fear in people on whether or not they want to play it, right? They want to play something like more consistent or something a little bit more in their control overall. I think your glass cannon deck transitioned to something more like the ancient box, that people would much rather play. They'd rather play the explosive single price deck rather than the explosive double price deck, um,
Mm-hmm.
overall. And so I think probably this sits at at most in the mid tier again. I don't think and nothing's gained from it. It's just the same old deck in here. You want a Irida turn 2 for your Baxcalibur rare candy and do the thing. Do the
Yeah.
thing.
I think I
Item
think
lock I don't think is as prevalent in this format, but um, I don't think that this puts the deck down too much. Reagan will
yeah.
probably still be playing it though.
I have a friend who plays it a lot, and I've played against it with my decks. I will say that like a good Chien-Pao pilot, the deck is absolutely devastating if they are able to get into their pieces, which the deck does get to quite a lot, right? Like
Hmm.
I play against it and I'm just like, I don't even know how anybody ever beats this deck. Because between Pokestop and Bibarel and, all the other cards and Radiant Greninja, just feels like the deck has lots of crazy threats. But I do think that where the deck falls apart a little bit is you all of a sudden have to play the suboptimal Frigibaxes and Bidoofs. And by that, I mean you have to play the 70 HP versions. Otherwise, they get sniped by Dragapult, right? And the problem with those 70 HP versions, if I remember correctly, is those versions are 2 energy retreat costs, not 1.
I think you're right on that.
So my friend, he was playing it, and it was just like, I was like playing Dragapult against him, and whenever he said that they were the 60 HP ones, he never got them set up. So you really need the 70s. And then if you play the 70s, if they get trapped in the active in the early game, you can't get your Chien-Pao into the active as easily. You can't get water energy out of your deck. Your deck also kind of falls apart. So there's a world in which I see somebody making a deep run, but I'm going to tentatively put this in mid-tier as well. I think it would be very high in mid-tier because it is very explosive. If you manage to dodge, if you just play the 60 HP ones, play the best version of your deck and say, I'm going to try to dodge Dragapult, which is very doable, I think, then maybe you just play the best version of the deck, play the Glass Cannon, and know that, like, hey, I think actually another bad matchup, though, is the Teal Mask Ogerpon Raging Bolt deck. And the only reason I say that is because, and also Miraidon, because those decks want to go second, and they can take prizes going second on the first turn, oftentimes. And so if your goal is to get Chien-Pao in the active to start the game, and their goal is to attack on turn 1 going second, well then they're going to be 2 prizes up on you most times, right? And I think that's bad for Chien-Pao, because like you said, it's a 2-prize attacking deck. So if you go down 2 prizes and you don't really have another attacker that can do much to them, you're kind of in a bad spot.
Yeah, it could just provide problems overall in your game plan and through games.
I'll put it in tier 2, in mid. Next deck on the list is my favorite deck, and I'm just gonna tell people right now on the pod, this is what I will be playing at NAIC. So I have done a lot of testing with this deck. I have deep understanding of it, I would say. It's Dipplin, the candy apple Pokemon with Festival Lead, ability that allows you to attack twice if you've got the Festival Ground Stadium in play. I mean, I could say it's good, but I'm gonna put it in mid tier just because I'm self-aware enough to understand what kind of a deck this is. But from an outsider's perspective, Jake, I want to hear what are your thoughts, and then I can tell you mine a little bit more in depth.
I think it's definitely a gimmick deck. Because I think you need to see so many pieces. My only thing is I don't know its full consistency in getting all of those pieces every single time, right? Because you can effectively one-shot everything, right? It's kind of technically two-shotting, but like you could effectively one-shot pretty much anything that doesn't have damage modifier or HP modifiers in the format at your peak. But being able to consistently get at your peak, I don't necessarily know the game plan to stop it outside of like disruption and playing things like counter stadiums, right? But I don't know. It's one of those that I need to see it to believe it kind of things.
I can understand that. It's a weird deck. I think it's a deck that when you actually get fully set up, and I'm talking 3 Thwackies and 2 Dipplins, and then 1 support Pokemon, 1 pivot Pokemon maybe. In a perfect world, I play Tatsugiri, and I have the rescue board on Tatsugiri early. It's my starting Pokemon. Like, in Magical Fairy Dreamland, Jake, that's the perfect board state for me. Is I don't even need to worry about damage on the bench. I can just have Tatsugiri as my pivot, 3 Thwackies, 2 Dipplins set up. That way, when you knock out my Dipplin, I send up a Dipplin, and I have 3 deck searches with Thwacky. So, in Magical Fairy World, which does happen actually, but in that world, the deck finds its pieces almost every time, like genuinely. Like It sometimes can be awkward if your hand is completely dead and you really need to just play Iono and you need to go use one of your Thwackies to get Iono, or Carmine. But yeah, like you play Vitality Band to do 220. You play Defense Band or Kieran to do a little bit more damage than that. I think the problems the deck runs into are decks that can do a lot of bench sniping early in the game, like very quickly. You do play, I play a 1/1 line of Rabska, so that is basically Manaphy plus Jirachi, but it also stops Dragapult. The problem with that is it's a stage 1, so you need a turn to get into it. And so if your opponent is able to just go crazy, find all their pieces, and you don't, you're going to have a bad time. So that's a real problem. And then, to be honest, trapping a Thwackey in the active is also a problem for the deck, weirdly enough. Because once the Thwackey's in the active, you don't have deck search. Your deck isn't really designed to like draw a bunch of cards otherwise. Like, and it's a 2 retreat cost, so you need to either attach 2 energy and retreat or attach an energy in a rescue board.
Yeah, I mean, because your energies are super, like...
limited.
You need them, yeah.
Yeah, like I play 2 Super Rods and Alana's Aid. So like I have, there are plenty of resources to get them back, but you know,
you just have to get them back in your hand.
yeah, I just got to get them back into my hand. So net, I'll say I think the deck can do very well. I think there are ways and strong decks that can really, deal damage to it. But you know what I like to see, Jake? I like seeing Teal Mask Ogerpon dominate online. I want people to play that deck because that's a deck I can beat. I don't worry about Teal Mask Ogerpon and Raging Bolt. I have a Lost Vacuum. I can get rid of their Bravery Charm. I have Iron Bundle. I can go around a 290 HP Pokemon. Also, side note for everybody playing Dipplin out there, I see so many lists that don't play Iron Bundle. Stop it. Play Iron Bundle.
Play Iron Bundle.
No, seriously. Your opponent, your opponent is just going to stick something big in the active after you've used a couple of those key pieces, and you're just going to be like, "Well, I can't kill this, but there's so many Pokemon on the bench I could kill." Play Iron Bundle. But yeah.
Iron Bundle.
Anyways, we'll move on. That's enough for Dipplin. The next deck on the list is probably the most hyped deck coming into the format before everything released. We have Dragapult EX. Jake, have you seen much gameplay with Dragapult?
Dragapult, I feel like, for a lot of people, has been underwhelming coming out of the gate. I think a lot of people have been turning a lot of their attention towards other decks, the other new decks that have come in format, or existing decks that have been boosted with new cards. So I don't consider this one to be super out there. It's definitely a shadow, I think, compared to the Dragapult VMAX that ran rampant in previous formats. I don't think it's going to be that great, but I still think it's something that you can look around, while you're at the tables, and you'll be able to see a couple of them throughout your day at NAIC, because I do think people in general just like spread decks. They like this kind of damage manipulation kind of deal. So I think this is a deck that people will play, but I don't think it'll do super great, to be honest.
I mean, you might be right there. Because I think, again, it's a deck that it's slow. I'll say that. Like, I don't think people know what the engine for it should be. Do you play Xatu? Do you play Charizard EX? Do you play Mila? I think everybody's kind of still like, it's the hands up in the air. Who knows exactly? The one thing I'll say about this deck that I think this one and then Gardevoir, which we'll get to in a bit, I think those are the 2 decks that if I was in a testing group, I would test this deck a lot. I would try to solve it, because I think if you can solve Dragapult from a consistency perspective, I think it is a very strong deck. And I think that those people in testing groups don't want to play it on TCG Live leading into NAIC. Because why would you want to give away your sauce, right? Like before Tord played his version of Charizard EX, that version wasn't being played on live. And I think honestly people forget that like testing groups exist not just to make the decks better, but to also conceal those choices from the rest of the community. And so I think that Dragapult EX has gotten a lot of testing in those groups. Maybe it won't really see much play still. Maybe they'll have decided the same thing you did. But I want to hesitantly put this into tier 1 because I think it can be solved. And I think that there will be one group of people who solve it and will benefit greatly from having done that. But that's a prediction. I don't think that we've seen that to date. So that's where I would put it. Do you disagree? I want to know.
I don't think you put it in tier 1.
You think it's a mid-tier deck? You think it's with
I think it's a mid-tier. I think it's a mid-tier deck until proven otherwise. Like it's
sure.
I mean, you could say like testing groups. So why don't the testing groups test Dipplin? And spend time on Dipplin. So it's like I see what you're saying, and I do agree that testing groups are able to really bring in these decks that become super vastly popular and certain deck building situations that people weren't aware of before. And I do agree with that. And I do think that's a respectable thing and something that people should look out for when going into these big online tournaments. But I don't think we can predict. Like, I don't think that we take into account that a testing group should do that because I'm not in a testing group. So I can't make that prediction. So it's like, I think it's one of those decks. I think it's the most viable to exceed our expectations, or most likely to exceed our expectations. But I still think it is mid until proven otherwise.
I like your argument, Jig. This is going to be a bold prediction here from the Metapod that Dragapult, as it stands now, is a mid-tier deck. And if somebody doesn't solve it, it is going to underperform at NAIC because as it stands, it is an underperforming deck.
I don't think underperformed is the right word because underperformed would mean that we have like high expectations of it, right?
I think a lot of people have. I think a lot of people, not us, but I think a lot of people have high expectations of it. I will say, also having tested it, it can feel really clunky at times. I fully agree with that.
Yeah, it's just like because you have to go into your stage 1. Is like the tough thing. Like Charizard just skips the stage 1. All these stage 2 decks skip an evolution while you're kind of forced to go in with your evolutions. I don't know. It just feels weird.
I think Gardevoir is the same way though, and Gardevoir is a very good deck. So,
but I think the difference in Gardevoir, which I would agree, I think Gardevoir, and we could just go right into Gardevoir. I think Gardevoir is a really good deck, and I think the difference is that because your stage 1 engine that you get stuck into or that you have to stop at gives you 2 different benefits, right? The 2 benefits being 1, refinement, drawing cards, but also the second is getting the energies in the discard, right? Through the refinement. True. So I think like the difference is that refinement Kirlia gives you 2 benefits while whatever the ability on Dracloak is,
it's like airmail.
That is airmail or whatever. It only gives you 1, right? Airmail is a strong ability. Don't get me wrong. One of the best decks I ever performed with had airmail. I know the strength of that, but I don't think it keeps up in the pace at which decks require it to play at. Overall, and I think just Gardevoir has much more benefits, and I would say Gardevoir is like almost a better version of Dragapult in a sense, without the quite literal like attack user face of like spreading damage.
No, I actually you made I think the points there were like really good. I think that Kirlia is just a better draw engine for the deck than Dragcloak is. I agree.
Yeah, it just provides more benefits.
I think the other benefit of Gardevoir is when you evolve into the Dragapult EX, you have to put a 2-prizer in the active in order to do your game plan. Whereas with Gardevoir, the goal is to actually keep your 2-prizer on the bench. And so you're forcing your opponent to have more resources to take those prizes. So for Gardevoir, it's like, yeah, I do have to eventually evolve into a stage 2, but that stage 2 is going to be, as best as I can control, out of harm's way. Whereas for Dragapult, it's like, yeah, I finally evolved this, and now I'm going to give you the opportunity to knock it out. Go for it. And yeah, that is a weird difference that like I've never thought about it that way, but like between those two things, Gardevoir in many ways as a stage 2 is just, if you're going to play a slow stage 2, it feels better.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say
And
Gardevoir.
it's one of those more refined decks as well. You
Yeah.
talked about like, decks kind of see their strengths over time. People start building it. And I think Gardevoir is something that's been done and it was proved last format.
So yeah, I would say Gardevoir is a tier 1 deck. I don't think it's S
Mm-hmm.
tier yet. I think it has weaknesses, right? But for the most part, I think it's a deck that's going to be very surprising to people. A single prize strategy still. You have Monkey Dory, so I think
Yeah,
it's a
Monkey Dory makes the deck cool.
yeah, I think it's a very solid tier 1 deck.
Mm-hmm.
Next deck on the list, Goldango. I want to do a little bit speedier now since I see like a lot of decks that we still gotta get through. I talked at length about too many things. Um,
Goldango's gimmick.
yeah, I think at this point Goldango is a meme deck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just is, right? Like Chien-Pao is better Goldango in many ways. Roaring Moon is in some ways better Goldango, so even Lugia is better Goldango. If you just want one shot,
Shout out
there's
Dan
better
Sweetman
decks.
though. Shout out Dan Sweetman, 12th place at
Yeah.
Los Angeles with Goldango. You had a great run.
I will also say, if Dragapult sees play, 200 plus 60 is exactly what you need to knock out 2 Goldengos in a row. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, big rip to Goldango. Giratina V-Star, a deck that was really, really good, maybe not the last format, but 2 formats ago. Is some form of Giratina V-Star making a comeback?
I think Garatina can make a comeback, right? Because you talk about some of the other decks that have been introduced in like the Raging Pulled Ogerpon, right? And some of these more awkward numbers with the 280, like some of
It's
these
true.
higher numbers that could be interesting. Dragapult still has the game plan of being able to one-shot something,
Yeah.
right? And especially when you talk about lost vacuums, right? In a lost box engine, right? Being able to get rid of these health modifiers to effectively make your lost impact that much more dangerous, and that much more effective to be able to just get rid of things overall. I think makes the deck much more viable, right? The more that we see these kind of decks that can't really respond to you as fast, I think the better Dragapult is overall.
Yeah, the Giratina. Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean,
Or yeah, Garatina. That's what I meant.
yeah. I mean, I don't know what. I don't know where to put this deck though. Like, I don't think it's a tier 1 deck. I just don't at this
I
point.
think you could effectively put it in the mid section because I think it does get better overall because of the reasons that I said, but also like I think it's kind of still in that category of like to be determined of like, you got to see it to believe it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Once the Lugias kind of come back around and Gardevoirs, are hanging prevalent and stuff, we'll see where this deck ends up being overall. But I think just like the Lost Box Giratina zone and the different things that it can do, right? It can be flexible with the Banets as
Yeah,
well.
it's true.
We saw Banet really take a turn at the end of last format, and I think that's something that can still be utilized, especially with the stage 1 Lost Zone Banet to be able to get a Colress back into their game plan. When one is prized, or maybe they had to discard one early or put one in the Lost Zone. Um,
Yep.
and just item lock in general could be really strong heading into the format if you're not careful.
Yeah. Next deck on the list, I think I'm just gonna slide Goodra right into meme tier.
I mean, it's like either play
It's,
Lost Gudra or play Lost Garatina.
I think you
One of
play
those
Lost
two.
Tina, and I think
Yeah.
with Goodra, I'm just like, if you want a stall deck like that, you're gonna play Blissey these days.
Yeah, I don't know which one's better.
I think you play Blissey these days. That's my gut. I'm just like Sharon's Care is just so strong in the deck.
Hmm.
Um, Next deck though is another deck that people were tentatively hyped on, maybe not as much as some of the others, but Greninja EX. So
Hmm.
Greninja has 2 interesting attacks. 170, search your deck for a card and put it into your hand. The second for a water and 2 colorless, you can do 120 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. Um, which is affected by double turbo. So keep that in mind if you're playing this deck. But it's still very interesting. But I think this is very much the definition of a mid-tier deck until somebody solves it. Like, I have more confidence somebody will solve
I think it's worse
Dragapult.
than that.
You think it's a meme?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a meme, but like I don't know if it's a mid deck until proven otherwise. I just think it's a mid deck.
You just
Like
think
I
no
don't.
matter what? Yeah, fair.
Yeah, like I mean, like, to be fair, the 170 is a cool number, and being able to grab whatever card you want
Yeah.
is a cool number in general, right? It's or a cool effect in general, and can be strong and can be used very well. Because just grabbing anything is really good. But I think Pidgeotta's just better in that, and
I
just
mean,
play a Pidgeot deck.
yeah, Pidgeot is just very strong. You can play Greninja with Pidgeot if you really want.
Yeah,
I will say
sure.
people are playing. I don't know if you've seen like Greninja Frostlass though has become all the rage in the last like 3 or 4 days.
I do really think Greninja Frostlass is cool and a really cool deck idea because of your ability to hit that 170 right, kind of gear up that damage amplification
Mhm.
for against some decks, and then be able to put them on a clock with the Frostlass for like being able to use that 120 snipe to effectively take out multiple things. I think is really really cool, but I think it's more gimmick.
Yeah.
Um, that's more like what I would take, like, wanting to have fun
Yeah.
in a tournament rather than like winning.
Next deck is, I think I'm just going to call this some sort of a future box deck. It might be Turbo Hands, but it's just
Mm.
represented by Iron Crown EX. I think at this point, that deck as it is just a meme. I
I think
don't,
it's mid meme tier.
yeah, I'll put it in meme for now because mid's getting very full. But
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know what the deck's game plan is. You know what I mean? Like
It's
maybe
just
there's
Iron
a,
Hands.
yeah. But like, for the most part, I'm just like, there's a lot of two prizers out now. I think
Mm-hmm.
a Turbo Iron Hands deck struggles if there's a lot of two prize decks that also want to go second. So
Mm-hmm.
the next one though, I think is really interesting. The Iron Thorns EX, the new Iron Thorns that stops abilities of EX and Vs.
No,
Quad Iron Thorns.
put it down below.
Put it into mid or the meme? You think it's a meme?
Put it. I think it's more of a meme. Yeah, this
Okay.
one is meme until proven otherwise to become mid.
I think it's a strong deck. I think though that it is very reliant on what other people are playing. There's a lot of abilities that people play, but like maybe in like, but I don't even think Raging Bolt struggles with this that much. Like, yeah, you turn off the Teal Mask Ogrepons, but you the Raging Bolt still has Sada available to it. And like,
Mm.
so what does Iron Thorns really have? I guess you have Electric Generator, but like, ugh, it just feels your damage output's not that good. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't really see it going anywhere.
Another deck that has seen a lot of play over the last year, Turbo Lost Box in all of its various forms. Where do you
Hmm.
see Turbo Lost Box living?
The problem with Turbo Lost Box, I would put it below Garatina because, like, I think you overall are just better off playing Garatina
If you're gonna
rather
play a
than
Lost Box
playing.
deck?
Yeah, if you're gonna play a Lost Box deck, I think the best way to play it right now is Garatina. Um, Sable's art is cool. Don't get me wrong. You talk about, but like the de-evolution of Lost Box moving away from Dragonite and Raikou, right, in that kind of turbo style, has just moved on to other bigger things. And I think Giratina is the only, like, kind of real surviving way to play Lost Box and still really excel, at a average person kind of level.
I don't know. This is a weird one for me. I don't know. I mean, we can rank the mid tier if we want as a separate ranking, but it's an awkward one where I think it is a mid tier deck currently. I don't know if it's better or worse than Giratina because you do have Roaring Moon, you have Iron Hands, you have Iron Leaves. You can play a lot of different tech cards,
Hmm.
but I would say for NAIC, unless you are very certain what you think your opponents are going to be playing on average, it's hard to build any sort of a box style deck when you don't know exactly what the format's going to look like, you
Hmm.
know? And so I think right now I agree, like for NAIC especially, what Pokemon do matter? Like you could just put the ones that are good, Roaring Moon and Iron Hands, but is that good enough, right? Is it too slow for certain matchups? I don't know. So it's weird.
Hmm.
This one, I know that you're very hyped on Lugia.
Lugia, I mean, I think Lugia is a meta threat. I think Legacy Energy coming into the deck makes it much, much more viable, right? Because you can either use the option on Lugia being a one prizer, or you can make your Chinchinos at any point a zero prizer, which I think
Hmm.
overall is really strong. It's the best deck to use the Legacy Energy because it's so easy to find, right, and be able to utilize effectively whenever you need it. There's not anything like the Faba, right? Times of Old and
Hmm.
Lost Thunder, to be able to get rid of these special energies whenever, or at least know ways that people really
Enhanced
consistently
Hammer.
play. Oh, yeah, but I don't know if a lot of people are gonna play Enhanced Hammer because like your only real, in my opinion, the only real prevalent time that you're gonna see Enhanced Hammer is against Lugia, and that's only one deck in the format. And I think Lugia is probably a top 5 most popular deck, but I don't think it's like anything crazy that you have to run Enhanced Hammer.
Yeah.
I think most decks, instead of playing Enhanced Hammer, would rather just run a card that makes their consistency better overall.
I would agree. I think the only deck right now that probably plays Enhanced Hammer is Dragapult. Most likely.
I think anything
Because
that really plays Arvin can play Enhanced Hammer.
I mean, yes, it can, yeah. But I'm saying I think the
Yeah.
only deck that will is
Oh,
Dragapult.
the only okay.
Yeah, like because Dragapult, it needs it because of Mist
Hmm.
Energy. If people play a Mist Energy on like some key Pokemon and you don't have an Enhanced Hammer and Dragapult, then you just lose. Game over. To be honest, that's just what happens. So you
Hmm.
do if you're Dragapult. So if there's a lot of Dragapult, Lugia will have some, I think, awkward matchups with Dragapult. But outside of that, I think you're right. I don't think people are going to find ways to get rid of that legacy. And the prize trade difference there is all that matters in some games, right?
Yeah.
So I put it up into tier one. I think
Hmm.
it's an interesting call. I think that it also opens up the possibility for people playing things like Iron Hands in Lugia, which was always a problem before,
Hmm.
of finding your basic energy. So next one on the list is the deck that won the Japanese tournament. We have Miraidon.
Hmm.
The first big tournament that came out when the cards for Twilight Masquerade were out. That one was a Miraidon deck. It ran 16 energy. It wants to go second. It's fast. Um, this is a weird one. I think that Miraidon will see a lot less play in the West because we are in a best of three format, not a best of one.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that because of that, we also are going to see a lot more players playing evolution decks in the West than would play it in Japan. And I think that Miraidon, if it only takes one prize on the first turn and your opponent takes two prizes every turn, then you are at a disadvantage versus the other way around. So I don't know. I want to put this into tier one because I do think the deck is really strong, but it will be dependent upon what it runs up against in any tournament. But what are your thoughts?
I think Miraidon is probably a tier one deck. Like overall, I think one of the things that's cool with Miraidon is nothing's really changed in a lot of it, but I think just as the decks move around, right, the meta fluctuates up and down.
Mhm.
I think just that's what causes the viability and the strength overall. And I do think once Lugia goes up in a format, Miraidon also goes up. Being
Yeah,
able to just schmack it overall, I think is really, really cool. But um, just being able to snipe things in general is just really, really nice, I think, effectively. It just makes it um it just makes it a threat overall, especially when you talk about the introduction of something like Tatsugiri,
Yeah.
right? Tatsugiri being able to find different key pieces like Arvin and Professor's Research to be able to move your game plan around and being able to utilize Iron Hands to get more prizes overall because you are an electric generator deck.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're playing double
and have
turbos now.
Yeah, and have like some other key pieces in the game plan that can really help you out, like a heavy baton or Zapdos, right? Like some of these different tech cards, Potown Story, even Tatsugiri, really.
Yeah. I think it's in a really good spot. It can handle one prize decks really well with Iron Hands. It can handle basic two prize decks really well with its
Hmm.
speed. I think the only place it really struggles is if you get into really big stage one or stage twos. Miraidon can struggle to take those late game knockouts. So,
Hmm.
but I think it's a really strong deck. It's fast, right? A lot of this format right now isn't as fast, and I think that
Hmm.
gives it an edge. Next deck I'm going to talk about is the Ogre Pawn box deck. So this isn't with Raging Bolt. This is just you want to play that Mask of Change item card. You're going to play probably Teal Mask Ogre Pawn as your main,
Hmm.
but then you can switch it in and out for the water one or the fighting one or the fire one, or probably not the fire one. Probably just the water and the fighting. Um, I don't know. This one feels like a meme.
This one I don't think is really there. Like, really, you're just utilizing like TLMS Gogurpon, you accelerate energies, you kind of wall a little bit with the fighting one, and I don't really see it overall. I think it's a cool idea, but I do think it's more of a gimmick.
Yeah, I think the deck is just more of a gimmick in general because
Hmm.
your game plan is being reactive as a game plan is not a bad idea, but like if you're up against something where the water and or the fighting type ogre pawn is not really that important, then you have probably a deck that's like not really that amazing against anything. It's just generically like fine as a deck. So like I don't know if the box components are flexible enough yet. But
Hmm.
next one on the list may also be a meme deck, despite I think what a lot of the community would like, which is Palafin EX.
Meme.
Yeah, it's a cool meme, but it's a
It's
meme.
a really cool meme. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't get me wrong, 340 HP is huge. That's
Hmm.
crazy. 250 damage is some good damage, there's a world in which this deck, I don't know, like if I saw a lot of Teal Mask Ogre Pawn Raging Bolt, I think
Hmm.
I'd play this deck with some Lost Vacuums and call it a day, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's got a weird, the damage output is just kind of awkward on it. It doesn't really do much else other than that at the moment. Like you can probably build it in different ways, but yeah, that's my thought.
Hmm.
Let's get to something that's been super hyped online though. Raging Bolt EX, in particular with the Teal Mask Ogre Pawn as a energy slash draw engine.
Hmm.
Where what do you think about this deck? The hype of TCG Live right now.
This is the perfect example of not knowing whether to put it in mid or meta threats. I think that this is quite literally the 1.5. I think it's a good
Mm-hmm.
deck. I think it's a viable deck, but a lot of people, like I remember seeing there was like this online tournament with 200 people in like the top, like 9 of the top 10 spots or something like that was Raging Bolt. I can't remember the tournament off the top of my
Yeah.
head, but I don't. And people are like, "Oh my gosh, it's Raging Bolt," and I do think that Raging Bolt is going to be present, and I do think Raging Bolt is going to be meta prevalent, but I don't think it's going to be a domination S tier, top tier deck. I don't really know if there's like an S tier deck right now, and it's definitely not Raging Bolt, but I don't think that Raging Bolt is entirely a gimmick. So it's like really weird because when it pops off, it is so strong, being able to, just be able to knock out anything, being able to draw a ton of cards per turn, be super consistent. But it kind of feels like sometimes you need to have the right pieces at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, yeah, this is the 1.5. This is where we make a new tier and just slide in like status unclear.
I would put it. Oh man, I want to put it in good right now next to Miraidon because I actually think that I think Raging Bolt EX with Teal Mask is like Miraidon's evil twin.
Mm-hmm.
In that they're both decks that can get a lot of energy on board for different reasons, but they get a lot of energy on board early. They want to go second. They can take knockouts early. I think that the Raging Bolt deck probably skews more towards like if the meta is a lot of 2-prize Pokemon and especially big 2-prize Pokemon, I think it's a better Miraidon. Mm-hmm. I think the more single prize decks you see, it's a worse Miraidon because you don't have Iron Hands, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's like its evil twin that likes seeing big Pokemon, and Miraidon is the evil twin that likes seeing single prize decks because of Turbo Hands. That's kind of where my brain goes.
I can see that.
Next deck on our list is Roaring Moon EX. Where does this one? Where does this guy live?
No. If you want to play Roaring Moon, just play the Baby and Ancient box. I don't think you need to get any more complex than that.
I'm gonna put this one in a meme category because I think at this stage, if you're playing Roaring Moon and you're like, yeah, I'll do 200 damage to myself, and then if Dragapult is played at all and is halfway decent, it's like, okay, cool. Let me play Lost Vacuum, and let me take 4 prizes right now. Thank you. Let's go. Yeah. Okay. This is the big baddie, I think, of the format. I think we just have 2 decks left. Actually, we'll leave the big baddie to the end. Origin Form Dialga V-Star, Jake.
I think Dialga is a tier 1 deck. That might be cope, but I think just the ability to be able to flip your V-Star marker and skip your opponent's turn is so good. It's so strong. It's one of the best V-Star powers, I think, in the game for sure. Probably second to Arceus. But it's almost like this might actually be the new glass cannon, right? Because if you don't get the attachments that you need and because I think the difference coming into this format is that you could probably go second, leave a Dialga V in the active and not get knocked out. But I think now there's a possibility that you do with the introduction of like the Teal Mask Ogerpon and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think it's pretty strong. Like unlimited damage output. It's not out of the ordinary in my opinion, especially with stuff like Prime Catcher, Boss's Orders and stuff like that, because you don't really necessarily need a draw engine, because your draw engine is like just finding energies at the top and accelerating them, and then all the rest of the pieces go into there. But it's like, I don't know. I mean, they don't have Matangs; they can't do anything. So that's the difficult part.
Yeah, the Matang question is awkward. Matang is 100 HP though, so it is a little awkward for Dragapult to deal with. You can't move 2 damage counters with Radiant Alakazam and then knock it out, right? It's a little more awkward. So yeah, it's a weird one. I'll put it in tier 1 because look, it did very well in the last format.
And
by
it's
no
super
means
surprising.
Yeah,
it's super surprising that in Los Angeles it was the 3rd most popular deck. I thought that was the most surprising part, and I think it's going to be a top 5 most popular deck at NAIC.
Really? I see. This is where like I don't think it'll be a top 5 most popular because I think people will play the new stuff a lot. So I don't think it'll be a top 5 most popular deck, but yeah, I mean I'll stick it in tier 1 because to your point, that V-Star attack, if you get that off, I don't know many decks that recover from that, right? Once that goes off, your opponent's going to be so far ahead on the prize trade. You're going to be so far down usually on your board state that you're just kind of like, I don't know how to recover, and I'm staring down the barrel of a 280 HP Pokemon that can one-shot anything I throw out. What do I do? So, yeah. Last deck, though, I'm going to talk about is the big bad of the format, Snorlax Stall, Blocklax, as they call it. A deck that people want to see its pieces banned. They want to see you know, that is not the opinion of the Metapod, but I think that look, the deck is crazy strong. It's won the last it won like Azul won a regional with it. A Form of Control, not a Snorlax deck, but a Form of Control won LA. So I don't think anything in the new set really screams counter to control. So Jake, where do we put this?
I think it's still a tier 1 deck, right? I think just the explosiveness of it and its real boost in the last couple formats. It does go down though, especially against something like the Teal Mask Ogerpon, because that is a support Pokemon engine that allows you to draw cards
Yeah.
overall,
And it's
right?
an
To be able
attacker.
to, and an attacker to be able to continue your game plan. So I think, I don't know. I still think control is good right now because I think a lot of people are going to effectively ignore it in a sense. Um, but I still think it's something that you need to watch out for, especially in a best of 3 format, right? Where you don't have, or where ties are viable. I think in any best of 3, especially right now, um,
Yeah.
I think you can do pretty all right with control.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tempted. Like, I don't know if we have any S tier decks right now. I want to. There's a part of me that wants to make a prediction of 1 or 2 S tier decks at the
Hmm.
end of this pod. I don't think that there's anything in that camp yet, but if I was going to put anything in S tier, one of the first ones would be Control, just because I don't see people playing enough switching cards, just in general,
Hmm.
right? Like, you think about this deck, and I've said it before. Kieran is a really good option in a deck. I think a lot of decks would benefit from playing one Kieran, but I don't know if one Kieran gets you there against Control, right? Oh, cool, I switched
Hmm.
once. If they get rid of your Pal Pad, cool, you got one switch. Golf clap. Congratulations, valiant
Hmm.
effort. So, but yeah, this is our tier list right now. If you had to put anything in S tier, what is your prediction?
I would. I don't really think that there's one deck that really dominates overall, but I think if like you're asking me like what do I think is going to win NAIC,
It's a good
what
question.
deck
Yeah.
is
What'll win? We don't have to put it in the tier, but
I think it would be I honestly feel like it would be some sort of control. Like I'm gonna be
yeah.
honest, I feel really good about Pidgeot EX again, after its performance and dominance over the last couple weeks. I still could see that happening in coming into this format, but I also feel like Gardevoir is a really, really good pick.
Yeah.
I feel like Gardevoir is just super strong, especially with the flexibility of being able to do Monkey Dory business now. I mean, Gardevoirs are now back to running Cresselias.
Yeah. It's weird. I feel like I think you're right. I think for winning the whole tournament, part of me wants to say Gardevoir because I don't want Control to keep winning. Not because
Hmm.
not because I hate it, but just because I'm like, I don't want to have to tech for Control. I'd rather not. Thank you. But I think Gardevoir has a good chance of winning it all because I think it's a little it's being slept on a little bit by a lot of people. Um, and it's really good. So those are our
Hmm.
predictions. Stall or Gardevoir has the best chance of winning the tournament, but I think it's a
I
pretty
say
broad field.
between, I think between, because I didn't actually give you an actual answer, I'll just stick with Gardevoir.
So here you have it now. Metapod prediction: Gardevoir winning
Hmm.
an AIC. And I'm gonna have egg on my face because I am not even playing the deck I'm predicting is gonna win. So there we go. I lose
No,
either
play
way.
the here's the big thing, especially about tournaments for a majority of our audience. Just if you're struggling with like what deck to choose for NAIC, what deck, should you pick, play your favorite deck, play the deck that you're most comfortable with. Doesn't matter if we ranked it tier 1, doesn't matter if we ranked it meme tier. If that's your favorite deck and that's the deck that you love playing, like, and you have fun with, go do it, right?
Yep.
That's the best chance that you've got, honestly, going into day 2, rather than picking up a deck right now, 3 days before the tournament starts,
Yeah.
um, that you don't know anything about in comparison to one that you've played with at locals for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. I fully agree with that. And if our advice is going to be the thing that sways you, you know, that means you're probably not one of the crazy top tier players who has testing groups and tries to find the right deck. So yeah, doubly so for all the people for whom this message is most relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but that'll do it for our NAIC like meta prediction. I think it's a weird format. I think a lot of the new decks need to really prove themselves still. They're pretty clunky in some ways. I think one deck will emerge from this new set as being the best deck in the set. But it's still kind of hazy as to what that is. Is it Ogerpon? Is it Dragapult? Is it Greninja? Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Jake, sign us off, and I'll see all the people out in NAIC.
Yeah, what time is what's the meeting that you have set up? I think you said you officially set a time and day, place, or whatever.
Yeah. I'm just gonna do a meetup on Saturday at 1 p.m. So anybody who makes day 2, you know, hey, you won't be able to, but I mean, join the Discord. People will be chatting in there, hopefully saying when they're gonna do stuff or meet up otherwise. But Saturday, 1 p.m. at the NAIC like main hall entry area. I don't know what it looks like yet, so it's hard to predict, but keep an ear to the ground on Discord for any details further.
Yeah, and I mean, Sean will be around in the venue.
Yeah,
you know,
I'll be physically present.
Yeah. If you see his mug, make sure to challenge him. Be like, hey, you looked at me funny. Let's battle.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah. Thank you so much for listening to the MetaFun Podcast, spoken podcast that revolves around the evolving meta. I'm Jake, that's Sean. Have a great rest of the day.